New Zealand's borders are currently closed to almost all international travelers due to the COVID-19 crisis, but there is an end in sight. So we have gathered our thoughts about when will the New Zealand borders open to international countries in the near future. Check out this video for all our predictions.
Hi guys, this is Robin and I'm Laura and we're the team behind New Zealand's largest travel guide, nzpocketguide.com. And in this video we're going to be going through our border predictions of when we think the borders will open to international countries for New Zealand, and also telling you the current situation of what's happening with international travel in New Zealand at the moment, and also talking about when the borders will open to international students, because we think that our predictions will be the borders will open a little bit differently for those types of travelers. But unlike our previous border prediction videos, in this video we're going to be shifting our predictions a little sooner in the video, thanks to your guys' awesome feedback, so you guys can know when we think the borders will open for New Zealand to your countries sooner in the video, and then we'll go through more of the sort of official business more toward the end of the video. And of course those student predictions are going to be toward the end of the video as well. So because this is an ever-evolving situation with the COVID-19 stuff, we have to do these videos every single month just to keep you guys updated, because things are always changing. So the best thing to do is to subscribe to this channel so that you can get our monthly predictions.
Alright, so let's get started with the thinking behind this prediction. So I won't take too long, I'm just going to go through a few bullet points of things that we've taken in consideration when creating the prediction for the borders opening. Alright, so the first thing that we kept in mind is that New Zealand had a second wave of the COVID-19 virus already. That was a few months ago, but that showed the vulnerability of New Zealand, and therefore the government has taken an even greater interest in taking this crisis extremely seriously and basically keep the borders closed for a little longer. There are also been some national elections in New Zealand on the 17th of October, and what happened during those elections is that the party that was in power, which is called Labour, won a landslide victory. So that basically consolidated the power and validated their response to the COVID-19 crisis. So in short, there is absolutely no incentive from the government to change their response to COVID-19 and change their very, very hard stance of border closure, since the public in a vast majority has validated it with their vote. So it's likely that the current train of thought will remain for the foreseeable future. The current requirements that New Zealand basically has as a criteria to reopen the border to any country is that there is a 30-day of no community transmission of the virus. That's an extremely tight criteria that almost no countries in the world are achieving. There are a few selected extremely isolated countries, such as some of the South Pacific Island nations, which are currently achieving this, but the bar is extremely high. So keep that in mind, because that is basically what the government has been requiring from countries in order to consider them for border reopening, and there is no kind of way that's changing for quite a while. We also kept in mind the fact that the quarantine facilities in New Zealand are basically not large. They are basically hotels which have been taken over by the government, and therefore there is just limited capacity. And so for this reason, reopening the border straight away to a vast amount of people is literally not feasible by the New Zealand government. Piggybacking on the quarantine facilities, there is also some issues with control within those quarantine facilities. There have been some highly publicized cases of people escaping the quarantine facilities, and so first, that's not good look on the New Zealand government, but also it is just posing a massive risk for the New Zealand population. And for this reason, the more people you let in quarantine, the more chances you have that people are going to try to escape. So for that reason, there is also this point of consideration taken by the New Zealand government. We're also looking at tracking capabilities. So the New Zealand government has an app that you can scan a QR code every time you go to a shop or to a cafe or to a restaurant or to a public place to show when you've been to that place in order to do contact tracing in case there is a new virus outbreak. But this is still a technology which is in its infancy, so I don't know how confident the officials are on the technology and if they actually really want to do a mass scale testing of it at this stage. Keep speaking about capacity. New Zealand is quite a small country. There's only about 5 million people living in New Zealand, and so therefore we don't have tons and tons of hospital bed equipped with ventilators and be able to cope with a huge outbreak. So for this reason, I don't think that New Zealand is going to be ready to have a new summer. Usually in summer tourism, the tourists in New Zealand, the influx of tourists in New Zealand, sorry about that, is about 2 million people. So I don't know if the country is able to cope with such a big amount. So obviously they're going to keep that in mind as well. But on the other hand, tourism is a major part of the tourism economy. I mean, the last 2 years, this was the biggest money maker for the tourism, for the New Zealand economy. So there is a big incentive to restart this machine. The local tourism economy can only do so much, and New Zealand will want to get tourists back on board as soon as possible. So they also do keep that in track. But something that you have to keep in mind is that one of the main criteria for reopening the border is how your country is handling the virus. As I mentioned before, New Zealand has tight requirements of 30 days without community transmission. So how your country is doing is way more important than any of the criteria I just gave right now, any of the things to take in consideration right now. It's how you handle it, and as soon as your country has it under control, then New Zealand will consider letting citizens from your country come into New Zealand, because they've decided to have a zero tolerance, zero case in New Zealand, and that is the road that New Zealand is going to stay on. Finally, the last train of thought, and that's a bit more of a little fuzzy term, but basically the tourism season in New Zealand usually runs in summer, which is December, January and February, and the low season is usually in winter, which is June, July and August. And so those months are where you have the least amount of tourists coming to New Zealand. So we think that the New Zealand government is going to maybe aim at reopening its border during the lower kind of season to start with a smaller influx of tourists and something more manageable to cope with, and just be able to test its system and processes on the lowest amount of tourists, and then it's going to kick in again later for the following summer. So for this reason, we think that the biggest influx of tourists for 2021 is probably going to be starting only in the winter, New Zealand winter. Anyway, with all that keeping in mind, please keep in mind that what we're going to be doing now is going to be only prediction. It is just the prediction from the people behind nzpocketguide.com. That is it, right? There is no official information. We obviously do base our prediction on some official information, but we will really highlight those things every single time. Make sure that you understand those are predictions. That doesn't mean you should book your flight and plan your holidays there. It's just to give you a rough understanding and when you may be able to travel to New Zealand in order to take your next holiday. We literally just predicting right here, and it's not official information. I really want to make sure that you guys know that we're not here to spread misinformation. There is nothing official right here. It's just to give you maybe a scale and an understanding of where that will be. Okay. And those predictions will apply to almost all type of visas. No matter, we will talk about specific visas later, but those predictions apply to all type of visa. It doesn't matter if you want to come here on a working holiday visa, or if you want to come here on a tourist visa, or just visiting families or anything like that. It is all this is applying to all type of visas, because it's just very unusual situation. Basically, usually when there are policies, they all apply to only like one or two type of visas. This is very unusual. Alright, let's get started with the predictions. We're going to start with Australia. So we're predicting that Australia may start seeing some border opening between the end of December, basically the end of the year, to January 2021. It may not be all the country, it may just be selected states, but that's kind of when we're seeing that happening. Australia has announced that passengers from New Zealand can travel to Australia quarantine-free from the 16th of October if they have not been in a designated COVID-19 hotspot in New Zealand, which we currently have none. So Australia has opened its border to New Zealanders. However, New Zealand is not ready to open its border to Australia just yet because the virus is still not in control in selected states. So there may be a gradual opening to Australia and to come to New Zealand, depending on which states they are coming from, because there are some states which are dealing with this much better than others. But that is so end of December and then January 2021 is when we're seeing Australia starting to open. The first country that we see opening its border with New Zealand may be the Cook Islands. We're predicting late November to December 2020. On the 8th of October, the Cook Island government said that the travel bubble with New Zealand was within weeks. But there has been a new case in the Auckland port where a port worker was diagnosed with COVID-19, and there have been a couple of extra cases related to that, and therefore this has scared a little bit the Cook Island government, and then the talk have backtracked a little bit more. But the Cook Island is getting itself ready with some really tight controls on the island. The island is COVID-19 free, so we're thinking that this is going to be probably the first one to reopen. So hopefully we'll be right on this one. That'd be cool to go to the Cook Islands for Christmas. Alright, the next country that we're seeing reopening may be Niue. So Niue is a very small island which has very strong partnerships with New Zealand. They actually even use the New Zealand currency there. We're seeing them opening in late January 2021. So Niue is currently COVID-19 free, and so the whole island is safe. However, well, Niuean, which obviously are, rightfully a bit scared of the virus, are also cautious of New Zealand. So they are beginning of talks, but I don't think that this is happening anytime soon. So we're thinking that for late January 2021. Moving on to the rest of the South Pacific Islands, we are seeing a lot of the South Pacific Islands starting their talk to reopen the border around February 2021. So here's some reasons why. So there is a big influx of tourists in the South Pacific Islands around Christmas time, because a lot of Kiwis and Australians love to go for an island escape around Christmas time. So for this reason, if the borders are going to be remaining closed to international travels in December, which is highly likely to be the case, then they're going to miss out on one of their biggest money maker of the year. After that, in January, starts the cyclone seasons, and the cyclone season is the time of the year when they are getting the least amount of tourists. So I don't think that the South Pacific Islands are going to bother trying to reopen the borders as soon as possible for taking extra risk, while they're going to get only a trickling of small amount of tourists there because it's not the right season to travel there. So we're thinking that they're going to start their talk in February 2021 to March 2021 and open only a month or two later. So that's our train of thought with that. There is a bit of an exception with French Polynesia, which has had quite a lot of cases because they reopened their border to all international travel, and we think that French Polynesia will need to get things under control before New Zealand will consider reopening its border to the country. Moving on to South Korea, it's Singapore and Taiwan. So we are predicting a reopening of the border for those countries between March and April 2021. Those countries are doing extremely well, especially South Korea, and they look that they've put the first and the second wave behind them. So hopefully that is going to be the case, and we are going to be able to see some South Korean coming to travel to New Zealand soon. Again, all of those predictions are just predictions, and so they just obviously forecast and they're nothing official, but they're also something that we would like to be wrong about. We take no pleasure in telling you guys that your country is not going to be able to travel to New Zealand for many months. We want you guys to come and travel here. We just try to set reasonable expectations. Alright, Japan, China and Hong Kong, we're seeing them opening in late March to mid-April 2021, simply because, those countries also are seeing the tail end of the virus as well, or hopefully, and there is no extra outbreak. But also China is a massive tourism market in New Zealand. It's a very vibrant tourism market, which is usually self-contained to their own buses and their own hotels and everything like that, so they mingle a little bit less with the community, so that may be an incentive to reopen for tourism from China earlier than other countries. For the rest of Asia, including the Philippines and Malaysia, we're seeing an opening between April and May 2021. Moving on to the UK, which is part of the Commonwealth, strong ties to New Zealand. We are thinking that the UK may be the first country to reopen its border in Europe with New Zealand, and we're seeing that maybe around March 2021, maybe April, May, depending on how the winter basically is dealing with the COVID-19 over there. Ireland, which has a land border with the UK, which is obviously a big, strong worry, knowing that the UK is still having quite a lot of cases. We're seeing them opening about the same time than the UK, which is March 2021. For the rest of Europe, we're seeing March to April 2021. Germany and Switzerland may open early as they are doing better than other countries, but there is a new wave of outbreaks in countries like France. And Italy. So for this reason, this may be delayed further. And again, we'll do some more videos with some more predictions as the situation develops. India may be opening around April 2021. There is a major case increase in India at the moment, but if you are, and we know that there is a lot of people from India which want to come to study in New Zealand, we will have a different predictions at the end of this video, so stay tuned and keep watching. Canada, which is also part of the Commonwealth, is doing, probably the best of the northern hemisphere of North America. Probably the best of all North America. And so we're seeing an opening in March 2021. For USA, probably a bit after Canada, so April, May 2021. We haven't seen that much control of the virus happening over there. So we will have to see what happens over the summer the winter in the US. It's all summer in New Zealand, so that's why sometimes I get confused, but yeah, the winter. Alright, moving on to South America. Chile and Brazil are not doing so well over there, so we are seeing an opening of the borders around May 2021 or maybe later. South Africa still has significant community transmission, and sadly is not much of a tourism market for New Zealand. Although there is, good ties between New Zealand and South Africa, it's not one of the top major tourism markets, so we're seeing an opening in May 2021. And for the rest of Africa, we're seeing May to June 2021. So again, I just want to make that very clear that all of that were just predictions. They apply to all type of visas, and we will be releasing more information about that as soon as the situation develops. So you may want to hit the subscribe button and stick with us throughout this whole situation. We also have thousands of travel tips for you to plan your next trip to New Zealand. So that may be a good channel for you guys to stay around. Now, for the rest of this video, I'm going to pass the baton to Laura, and we're going to go over the current situation in New Zealand, as well as some predictions for students.
Okay, cool. So like Robin says, we're now going to just go through what the current situation is with the borders in New Zealand, and then after that, we'll talk a little bit about the student predictions. So currently right now the border measures as they stand at the moment, and I'm going to give you more official information right now taken from the Immigration New Zealand website, and what they say is that you can come here without first requesting to travel if you are a New Zealand citizen or a permanent resident, a resident with valid travel conditions unless you got a resident visa outside of New Zealand and you have never used it to travel here, a partner or dependent child of a New Zealand citizen or resident and your visa is based on this relationship, or a diplomat who holds a post in New Zealand. And other travel must be for a critical purpose. So since our last border prediction videos, there have been a few changes for different types of visa holders that the borders are now opening to. But again, it's a very limited amount of people. So these, and this is referring to resident work visa holders that are normally residing in New Zealand but are currently overseas. So I'll just read to you what Immigration New Zealand say about these people that are, again, resident work visa holders that normally reside in New Zealand but are currently overseas. So the government last month announced it would allow some work visa holders who are overseas now but normally live in New Zealand to re-enter the country. Only those who departed New Zealand between the 1st of December 2019 and the 9th of October 2020 and held an essential skills work visa based on a mid or higher skilled employment or assessed as at or above the medium wage, a work to resident visa or an entrepreneur work visa when they left are eligible to request entry as a work visa holder who normally lives and works in New Zealand. Applicants must be able to show that they have the same job, so are complying with their existing visa conditions, or continue to operate a visa here. So basically what that says is that people that are overseas that are on an essential skills work visa for New Zealand or a work to resident visa or an entrepreneur work visa, they can start applying to come back to New Zealand if they're overseas, but only if they left New Zealand between the 1st of December 2019 and the 9th of October 2020, and they're still coming back to do the same job as per what it says on their visa and what their visa conditions are based on, or if they're coming back to run the same business. So that's basically what that says. But there is another of the few exceptions of types of people that can come to New Zealand that is slightly different from our last border prediction video, and that is for partner reunion. So Immigration New Zealand says, from the 5th of October, Australian citizens or permanent residents and people from visa waiver countries can apply for a request to New Zealand if they can prove they are a partner of a New Zealand citizen or resident. And just so it's clear what visa waiver countries are, if you go on the Immigration New Zealand website, they do have a list of the visa waiver countries, just so you can check out which countries those are. But that's pretty self-explanatory for if you are for a partner reunion with a New Zealand citizen or resident. So that is the limited exceptions of people that the borders are currently open to in New Zealand. So yeah, basically anyone else, any other type of international traveller, the borders are not open to. Just to give you some information for those people that can enter New Zealand. So for people entering New Zealand, they must stay in a managed isolation or a quarantine facility for at least 14 days to complete a health assessment and return a negative COVID-19 test before they can go back into the community. Before leaving the facility, a final health check will be carried out, confirming the person has not tested positive for COVID-19 or is not a probable case, does not have symptoms of COVID-19, and has a temperature below 38 degrees Celsius. And also, just as some extra information, the cost of quarantine might be passed on to the passenger, and that's usually around 3,100 New Zealand dollars. Like we've been saying in this video, the situation is ever changing, and the borders opening could change in the few coming months. Obviously nothing is official just yet, but make sure you subscribe to the channel so you can see our next border prediction videos, as we'll be releasing these every month as the situation changes with some updated information.
Alright, so let's move on to talking a little bit about students wanting to come to study in New Zealand. So the reason why we have a slightly bit different prediction and different train of thought about students coming to New Zealand is because they're extremely different type of travelers. They're not coming to New Zealand for only a 2 weeks holiday or for visiting families or anything like that. They're coming to New Zealand to first contribute to the economy, as international student to New Zealand is a massive part of the New Zealand economy, but they're also coming here for a longer period of time, meaning that a 2 weeks quarantine although a bit annoying, is much less of a burden on someone that's coming to study in New Zealand for 12 months rather than someone that's just planning a 2 weeks holiday to New Zealand. So for this reason, students may be allowed to come to New Zealand a little bit earlier. Now, with that in mind, that doesn't mean that there is not going to be a miss on the February intake. They already have some universities, especially some university in the US, that have simply cancelled their intake for students going from the US to New Zealand to their partner universities. So we have already seen a significant amount of cancellation for February intake. So we think that quite a lot of students may miss out on the February intake. But for the next intake, the border will probably be open independently of which country where students are from, because that will give time to New Zealand to be able to prepare enough quarantine facilities and to be able to get more people coming in New Zealand to come and study. But we think that it's highly likely that the quarantine fee will be passed on to the students. So Laura was mentioning that the quarantine fees has been evaluated at around 3,100 New Zealand dollars. That's something extra for students to plan out on. So our strong advice for students, and we've received a lot of questions from students wanting to come to New Zealand, is do not book anything just yet. The situation is way too fluid, things are changing way too often, so please do not enroll, do not book anything, do not pay any fees. Wait until there has been an official announcement, because there may not be a February intake, but the intake may just be literally only a few months later. The whole schedule and calendar of studying in New Zealand may completely change in 2021. So we really strongly encourage you to first have another backup plan. Like, if you can't come study in New Zealand in 2021, have a plan of something else to do. And second, don't pay anyone for any fees or anything to get that process started. Don't do it. Just do it when you actually have concrete information. And we'll make sure that we put some concrete information in here where we know when the border is opening and when things are happening. But we just want to put that very clearly here, just because so many people have been contacting us and we've already heard of some people not behaving, or some companies or some shady companies not behaving so well, and we want to make sure that that this is not disturbing anyone. Like this ringtone. Anyway, moving on. If you guys want to subscribe and like, this video took us a lot of work to put together. There is a lot of work into all our predictions, into all of these kind of things. There's also thousands of videos on the channel to help you plan your trip to New Zealand, and there is also thousands of articles on nzpocketguide.com, which is the largest travel guide to New Zealand. Stay safe out there. Please make sure that you follow the directives from your local governments on how to handle the crisis, and we'll all get through this together. In the meantime, thank you very much for watching. Bye bye.
Bye.